Hi, and welcome to That's Ready Mysterious. Join me for an intriguing look into real-life mysteries. Who was the mad gasser of Mattoon? What was whaling at the Wilga waterhole? I'm not going to solve those mysteries, but they'll be interesting to learn about. I'm your host, Kelly with an I. Transcripts and references for all episodes can be found at that'sreadymysterious.wordpress.com. No apostrophe and no exclamation point. Today's tale is about the H.L. Hunley. Archaeologist Michael Scafuri said that we may never know why the H.L. Hunley sank. He said, "I would love to get to that point, absolutely. We keep seeing parts that no one has seen in 150 years. All of them add into the mix of what happened and how this sub was operated. After all, we don't have the blueprints." The H.L. Hunley was a submarine built by the Confederate Army and operated during the United States Civil War between the years of 1863 and 1864. It became the first submarine to sink an enemy ship on February 17, 1864. The first submersible used in a war was the Turtle, which was a hand-powered submarine used in a failed attempt to sink the British HMS Eagle in New York Harbor in 1776. The CSS H.L. Hunley was the first to complete the job nearly 100 years later. The CSS H.L. Hunley was built in Mobile, Alabama by shipbuilder and riverboat captain James McClintock, engineer Baxter Watson, and lawyer Horace Lawson Hunley. Hunley had put up most of the capital to build the submarine, so it was named after him. The group had built 3 submarines. The first was built in New Orleans and was called the Pioneer. It was tested in the Mississippi River in February of 1862. The submarine was scuttled due to the Union Army advancing on New Orleans in April. Hunley's group then moved to Mobile, Alabama, where they built their second submarine, the American Diver, sometimes also known as the Pioneer II. They tested steam power, electromagnetic propulsion, and a hand-powered crank, and finally settled on the latter. American Diver was towed to the mouth of Mobile Bay to attack the Union blockade. There it sank in choppy waters, never to be recovered. Soon after, the group built the H.L. Hunley. The Hunley was less than 40 feet or 12 meters long, no more than 4 feet or 1.2 meters beam or wide, and 4 feet 3 inches high. It weighed about 7.5 tons or about 6.8 metric tons. It was built from a wrought iron boiler off another ship in 1863. The Hunley held up to 8 crew members and a powerful torpedo. 7 crew were to crank the hand-cranked screw to propel the submarine. The last crew member was to pilot it. The Hunley had ballast tanks, hand pumps, 2 watertight hatches, and 2 conning towers. Originally, the torpedo was to be towed on a rope behind the Hunley, which would dive before reaching a ship and quickly surface on the other side, putting the ship between the Hunley and the torpedo. This was deemed too dangerous, so a spar or barbed pole that was about 16 feet or 4.9 meters long was added to the front of the Hunley. This spar held the torpedo, forcing the Hunley to directly impact on a ship. Torpedoes at the time were very primitive, and the torpedo the H.L. Hunley carried was made of a copper keg which held 135 pounds or 61.2 kilograms of black powder. In July of 1863, the Hunley was ready for testing. The first demonstration in Mobile Bay went well. The H.L. Hunley sank twice before sinking for its final time in 1864. The first time the Hunley sank, it was still at dock. 5 crew members died in this sinking. The second time the Hunley sank was on October 15, 1863. It sank during a demonstration, killing all 8 crew members aboard, including Horace Lawson Hunley. This time, the crew had tried to drop the keel weights, but they were too late in doing so. In 1863, the Hunley was deemed to be ready for battle and was sent by rail to Charleston, South Carolina, arriving on August 12th. In practice runs, the Hunley hadn't done very well, but on February 17, 1864, the Hunley was sent out to attack the USS Housatonic with its spar torpedo. This was its first and last combat mission. The Union ship, the USS Housatonic, was an 1,800-ton or 1,633 metric tons steam-powered ship that was about 2.5 miles or 4 kilometers from shore. The Hunley attacked the Housatonic with its spar torpedo, ramming 135 pounds of black powder into the hull of the Housatonic below the waterline. The torpedo exploded. This was enough to sink the ship in less than 5 minutes and killed 5 of the crew members aboard. The H.L. Hunley, however, never returned from its mission. Shortly after sinking the Housatonic, the Hunley itself sank, killing all 8 crew members aboard. And there the Hunley sat in about 30 feet or 9 meters of water about 4 miles or 6 kilometers offshore until it was found in 1995. The Hunley was discovered just about 985 feet or 300 meters away from the final resting place of the Housatonic in Charleston Bay. On August 8, 2000, the Hunley was raised intact from the seafloor. At 8:37 a.m., it broke the surface of the water for the first time in 136 years. The Hunley was completely intact, save for a hole in one of the conning towers and a small window that may have been broken out. It didn't show extensive damage. The H.L. Hunley was taken to North Charleston's Warren Lash Conservation Center, which had been built especially for the Hunley. The crewmen's remains were removed from the Hunley for burial and were interred in Magnolia Cemetery in Charleston, South Carolina on April 17, 2004. They were buried next to the crew that had previously sank with the submarine. The Hunley was carefully researched and preserved. Previously, it was thought that the crew of the Hunley had drowned or suffocated, but the research showed this was not likely to be the cause of death. There was no sign the men had tried to escape at all. They were all still at their posts. There was no evidence that they had taken any action in response to the flood of water or loss of air. In 2017, researchers at Duke University suggested that the torpedo blast may have produced a shockwave that ruptured the blood vessels in the crewmen's lungs. This would be called blast lung. The shockwave would have either killed the crew instantaneously or incapacitated them so they couldn't man the vessel or try to make an escape. According to a 2018 article, researchers had recently begun removing sediment from the Hunley and conserving its 8 cast iron keel blocks, which weighed a total of half a ton, and were used to study the submarine. The blocks were connected to a quick release inside the submarine. If necessary, the crew could eject the blocks and quickly resurface. Work on the submarine showed that 3 levers of the release mechanism weren't engaged, so the keel blocks were all in place. The crew never tried to release them. This shows that either the crew didn't think they were in trouble or were incapacitated before they could pull the levers. Joanna Rivero was a conservator on the project. She told the Post-Courier that as a diver, your first instinct is to surface if you're in trouble. She said it's part of your training to release the weight belt, and the keel blocks serve the same purpose, so it seems that the crew didn't have any sense of panic. What happened to the H.L. Hunley? There are some theories. The first is that the submarine got stuck in the mud waiting for the tide to turn, and that they then couldn't get out. This theory doesn't seem likely because releasing the keel blocks may have gotten them out of the mud. The second theory is that another ship rushing to the aid of the Housatonic may have struck the Hunley, incapacitating it. Another theory suggests that the blast from the Housatonic was enough to incapacitate the crewmen. The crew would have been no more than 42 feet or 12.8 meters away from the blast. The resulting blast wave could be enough to knock out the crew and rupture their lungs. Rachel Lance is a biomechanist at Duke University. She has studied the H.L. Hunley extensively. She says that blast injuries are similar to the way remains were found in the submarine. The blast waves wouldn't have damaged the skeletons and would have incapacitated the crew. She went on to explain that blast waves are fully capable of creating lethal injuries on someone without moving their body. The intact keel blocks, coupled with the fact that the crew didn't try to open the hatch, suggests that they were incapable of doing so, which seems to confirm this theory. To figure out how the H.L. Hunley's torpedo might have affected the crew, scientists conducted experiments over the course of 3 years. This included repeatedly setting off pressurized air blasts and black powder explosives near a 6.5-foot or 2 meters long model of the Hunley nicknamed Tiny. Tiny had sensors and was floating in the water. The scientists often found the experiments frustrating. Lance explained that she was often frustrated with pressure gauges that didn't work, with black powder that got too wet to explode, or with weather that seemed to go between freezing and very hot. She said these experiments were very difficult to conduct. The findings of the experiments seemed to show that the crew died instantly in the blast wave. The hot chocolate effect shows how vibrations travel at different speeds in water than air. The experiment showed that the shock wave from the Hunley blast would have traveled 3,355 miles per hour, or about 5,400 kilometers per hour in water, but only 760 miles per hour, or 1,224 kilometers per hour in air. Lance said that when you mix these speeds together in a frothy combination, such as in lungs or a hot chocolate, it slows down the waves. The slowdown increases tissue damage because the shock wave would have lasted longer in water than in air. This is a worst-case scenario for the lungs. However, because all of the soft tissue had decomposed, it's impossible to know for sure what the men died because of the blast. What happened to the H.L. Hunley and her crew? What do you think? Leave a comment and let me know what you think. Thanks for listening to today's episode of That's Ready Mysterious. Join me next week for another captivating mystery.